There's also some people that really love big picture, macro level questions and themes about not only economics, but Catholicism. And what bigger picture person for Catholics today than Pope Francis? Pope Francis himself, criticizes some things very fiercely and other things not so much. One thing that, Pope Francis has criticized recently is that Pope Francis seems kind of anti-capitalist. And what you mentioned before, that when you were in college, you talked about this capitalism versus socialism kind of problem, which is, this big picture topic that I'm talking about now. But if he's anti-capitalist, does that mean he's socialist? Is Pope Francis leading that way? What are we doing?
So I think a lot of, especially North Americans, like to put Pope Francis in a spectrum that Pope Francis doesn't even recognize. So the spectrum being like the capitalist on one side and the socialist on the other. And if Pope Francis is criticizing capitalism, then he must be a socialist, right? But Pope Francis, you can't put him in that box. Catholic social teaching is not within the spectrum of that capitalism and socialism construct. So capitalism is invented in the way that we know it, in the way that it's expressed with the invisible hand, right? Mm-hmm. Like that kind of capitalism was made by Adam Smith in 1776. Now, elements of the free market obviously pre-exist that. And socialism comes with Karl Marx in the 19th century. So those are very new things. Catholicism is way older than those things, older. Right? So the church has a bigger perspective. And the church's teaching on economics sits outside of the spectrum of capitalism and socialism. And honestly, the Catholic teaching on economics is much more practical. So capitalism and socialism are less economic systems and more ideologies or philosophies. So, and they're exaggerations. So one will say things like something outlandish, like no government intervention in the economy. And the other will say total government control of the economy. And we know deep down that neither of those things are possible. At some level, there's got to be balance. So some will say, okay, well then Catholicism is somewhere in the middle, right? It's like this moderate perspective on capitalism and socialism, and that's not the case. It sits outside of the spectrum entirely. So if you see only within the spectrum of capitalism and socialism, as many Americans do, understanding Pope Francis is impossible. So, and there's no quick answer to this. Right? This is why it's a blind spot among the Catholic population, especially in the United States, is because the first step to understanding Catholic social teaching on economics is to leave the capitalism and socialism spectrum.